Welcome to Who's in STEM. I'm Ken Ono, your host and the STEM advisor to the Provost and the Marvin Rosenblum Professor of Mathematics at UVA. Our goal is to evoke flights of imagination and wonder by showcasing the cornucopia of all that is STEM at UVA, the marvelous world of UVA science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Now, in 1976, when I was 8 years old, I met my grandparents for the first and actually the only time I met them. These grandparents, my father's parents, they came to the U.S., having made the very long trip from Tokyo, Japan, having traveled halfway around the world. I was excited to meet them, and of course, I was a kid. They had gifts unlike anything I'd seen before. They brought these colorful Japanese rice paper balloons that you blew up through a little hole. And after you blew them up, you batted them about, and somehow they kept their shape, despite the fact that we were playing slow-motion hacky-sack. They also brought these sweet snacks, stick biscuits covered in chocolate. I've never seen anything like them before. Pocky, available today in most local stores. They also gave me this wooden abacus with 13 rods. I'm a mathematician, so let me just tell you, some of the beads represent the number 5, while the others represent the number 1. And it was like an interesting math exercise, just figuring out how to do basic calculations on this little old wooden device. After I figured it out, I loved calculating baseball stats on this abacus, using the numbers that I found on my Topps baseball cards. Now, if I'm honest, I also have to admit that I also pretended that the abacus was like a race car when I shot it across the room. Now, regrettably, that visit was the only time I got to share with my Oji-san and Oba-san. I never saw them again. Japan was just so far away. And on top of that, long-distance phone calls back then were outrageously expensive. I looked it up. Back then, the phone company charged $4 per minute for a long-distance call to Japan. Today, the world is very different. The world basically seems to be at our fingertips, quite literally on our smartphones. Much of our lives today are spent online, on the internet, and, well, we routinely make video conference calls to all corners of the world. I frequently Zoom with my colleagues in Germany and Japan in a moment's notice, for free. Had these technologies been available in the 70s, then I surely would have had much more than just a handful of fleeting memories of my grandparents. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome today a superstar UVA engineer who's played a significant role in this modernization. Professor Scott Acton is the chair of UVA's Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And, well, Scott, welcome to Who's in STEM.
Thank you, Ken. I am a big fan of this podcast. I love the interview with Devin Harris on smart cities. I love the interview with Francis Collins on the Human Genome Project and his amazing life. And you got me hooked on the work of Cathy O'Neil and weapons of math destruction.
So, Scott, there is so much to talk about. I'm not really sure where to start, but as chair of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, ECE for the rest of our conversation, let's start there. Start with the basics. What is electrical and computer engineering?
Electrical and computer engineering is almost as diverse as the people who do ECE. At UVA, we emphasize 4 areas. The first is chips and devices. We make things. We make things in our 17,000 square foot clean room, the biggest in the Commonwealth. A clean room is a special room where chips are made. It has to be free of dirt and dust that could contaminate materials. And we're making chips and other sensors and devices. That's one area. A second, which we'll talk about a lot today, is AI, artificial intelligence. We have 69 federally funded AI researchers in UVA engineering, many of them in my department, ECE. A third area is what we call cyber-physical systems. Machines, computers that interface with humans and interface with the physical world. We have a special lab at UVA. It's called Link Lab. And Link Lab is a place for cross-disciplinary innovation. The fourth area would be computer engineering, making research advances that lead to improvements in computing quality and computing speed. Finally, I have an aspirational area. It's engineering and medicine. We have a group of researchers that are developing medical technology. An example is imaging. And to sum all of those up, electrical and computer engineering is responsible for everything from the computer to the iPhone to magnetic resonance imaging and beyond.
Chips. AI, cyber physical systems, computer engineering. That's all important stuff. Now, I want to circle back to my opening remarks about my grandparents and the enormous advances in computer technology. In view of that list of topics that you cover in your department, I have to ask, did universities even have ECE departments in the 70s? How has this field changed, and how has your department in the university responded with these advances?
Did you know, Ken, that UVA engineering is the oldest engineering program in the South? So the computer part, the C in ECE, was added in the 80s and 90s as the computer became central in our engineering world. So in my lifetime, there have really been three critical ECE moments. The first was the advent of the personal computer. And that personal computer got into the home, but it also got into the university, both big and small. Second was the introduction of the internet, maybe in the late 80s, early 90s. This allowed information to be disseminated across the globe. When I was a grad student, we used to use the internet to watch a coffee pot in Cambridge, England, called the Trojan Room Coffee Pot to see if somebody had made the coffee in England. Now, the third event is the arrival of AI, artificial intelligence, as a life-changing technology. AI might have been something that computer scientists and computer engineers have studied for a few decades, but now it's in the hands of the consumer. It's changing our lives. ECE is at the center of all three world-changing events.
Yeah, I remember the first lecture I attended on artificial intelligence in the late 1980s. And if I remember correctly, it was a presentation on a program called ELIZA. And you sat down at a keyboard and you had this virtual conversation with ELIZA. And I remember being stunned back then by the fact that this computer pretended to be human. But it turned out that after a minute or two, you could trip it out quite easily. Fast forward to 2024, where we are today, I can't believe how far we've come. It's what we're talking about in AI. It's not just enhancing your Google search. It's streamlining industry, streamlining companies. And in my field, in pure mathematics, we're even talking of generative AI that can check deep mathematical proofs, which is pretty mind-blowing, honestly. So your department and the field in general, ECE, explains and illustrates how far we've come technologically in the last 100 years. It's really remarkable. Scott, you are a computer engineer, and I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about your achievements. What have you done here at the university, and what are your plans for the future in your research group?
Thanks, Ken. Well, let me tell you about three projects, and I'm going to start with the future. We have a project called Artificial Intelligence for Advancing Instruction, or simply AI. It's a collaboration with the School of Education and Human Development at UVA, and particularly with a key researcher named Dr. Peter Youngs. So here's the scenario. It's really expensive to send human observers into the classroom. A typical classroom might be observed 1 or 2 times per year. We're using video and computers and AI developed at the University of Virginia to recognize actions and activities in the classroom. And I can tell you about a few of these. For almost zero cost, we can provide feedback on their classroom experience. We can do things like answer questions such as, how much time did we spend in group activity today? How much time did the teacher spend in one-on-one instruction? How much time was wasted in transitions? Did the teacher use demonstratives to illustrate a mathematical concept, for example? And so we can get this feedback quantitatively to the teachers and possibly to people that also mentor the teachers. And we're excited about this work. So is the National Science Foundation, who funds us, Robertson Foundation, who funds us, and Schmidt Futures. We're hoping this year to start a unique partnership with the Gates Foundation, where we can reach underrepresented groups across the United States. And we think this project has the potential to significantly advance the training, particularly of math teachers in underserved areas of the United States.
So as a math professor, one of the skills that we have to develop is we need to have tools that help us assess what students struggle with, right? And of course, exams, quizzes, and homework offer some insight into that. Are you working on tools that will help in real time, for example, us develop a good sense of which mathematical ideas and concepts need reinforcement?
Great question, Ken. And that's where Peter Youngs comes in. The School of Education at UVA basically has been a key player in developing rubrics that answer your question. One of them is called MSCAN. And MSCAN is particularly for elementary mathematics and elementary mathematic concepts. And these rubrics are generally completed by a human observer. One question we're asking is, can some of these agnostic features that contribute to the rubric be computed by the computer? And then the human, of course, is still in the loop, making sure that the rubric is executed correctly. The second project is more biological. We're looking at trying to unravel mysteries of bacterial biofilms. So bacteria live in communities, and these communities are called biofilms. And understanding how these communities thrive is the key to understanding the gut biome. It's the ecosystem of microbes in the intestines, and it's linked to immunology, to mental health, to weight, to heart disease, and so on. So to observe these bacteria, we either can use electron microscopy or light microscopy. If we use electron microscopy, the samples are dead, and that's useless to our study. If we use light microscopy, we're limited by what's called the diffraction limit. Think about things smaller than, say, 300 nanometers. We can't see them. These bacteria are sometimes as thin as 100 nanometers, 1,000 times smaller than a human hair. So we're trying to resolve these bacteria, and now we can do it essentially using new technology from UVA, super resolution microscopy. This is the technology of my collaborator, Dr. Andreas Gallman in UVA chemistry, also going with our Who's in STEM theme. With his imaging equipment, we can observe these bacteria in their living environment. Where do I come in? The images are messy, and there's hundreds of thousands of bacteria in a glob. Imagine this. We have to use artificial intelligence and advanced image analysis to segment the bacteria. That is to determine one from the other, to determine the shape of an individual bacterium, and then to track them through time. We're able to do this, and we've been working for a few years with the Gallman lab and successfully discovering things about the bacteria and their biofilms.
So projecting into the future, this technology that's produced by your joint partnership, what applications are we talking about?
Great question, Ken. So 3 applications come to mind. Testing drugs for human health of the gut biome is one. Looking at why some bacteria are antibiotic resistant is a second. And third, this might blow your mind, using these bacteria and their biofilms in energy sources. I want to tell you about a third project. It's a project that's now concluded, but it was with the UVA Brain Institute.
So this is the institute that's headed by my good friends Jaideep Kapoor and Sarah Kasinas.
Exactly. So UVA Brain Institute was looking at lymph glands, and we all know what lymph glands are. They're in our armpits, they're in our neck. You might have them examined when you're going into the doctor to check out a certain illness.
Yeah, you're usually unhappy when they're swollen.
That's correct. They're just doing their job, they're getting rid of waste. And for a century and a half, medical schools taught that these glands existed in various places, but not in the brain. There was no lymph in the brain. Then, groundbreaking 2015 University of Virginia School of Medicine, led by, in part, a man named Yoni Kipnis, discovered lymph in the brain, in the meninges. And so you might remember that the meninges is like this protective layer of the brain, and distributed throughout the meninges were these lymph glands, these lymphatic structures. I was so excited about this discovery that I moved my office to the med school for a year, and I worked with these researchers on imaging and understanding lymph in the brain.
So have you mapped these structures now?
Yes, Ken, we did, both geometrically and functionally. Functionally meaning the direction and progression of waste removal within the meninges.
Wait, so what kind of waste are we removing from the brain?
Great question. Well, there's a number of things that we remove, including dead cells, plaques.
Plaques, like amyloid plaques that so prominent in the study of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's.
Exactly, Ken. And due to the imaging and to the basic science work of the Kipnis lab, we were able to join forces, engineering and medicine, and basically establish for the first time a link between lymph and Alzheimer's, which led to another set of important discoveries and was published in Nature.
You know, in my field, we often talk about scientists who are polymaths, right? They can use mathematical skills in so many different fields. Maybe is there a term called polyengineer? Because you covered so many different fields, and I certainly didn't expect to hear about your work being related to the Brain Institute. That's new to me.
I think that's what keeps me going, Ken, and that's the beautiful thing about being a professor, which I think you and I share, learning about new fields, new problems, and bringing the tools to different fields.
So those are 3 projects you've been involved with since coming to UVA. And I looked at your CV earlier in preparation for this. You came to UVA in the year 2000, but you graduated from college in 1988. So there's a 12-year span. I'd like to talk about that. What were you up to for those 12 years before you arrived on grounds?
So after graduation, I headed west in a really cheesy red Camaro and landed in Texas. There I became the student of a 2-time Emmy Award-winning professor named Al Bovic, who's also in the National Academy. We worked on computer vision. Think about making computers see with cameras. And we used neural networks to solve computer vision problems. I remember that in my last week in Texas, Professor Bovic told me, never admit that you worked on neural networks. Because you see, Ken, at that point, work in AI was seen as a massive failure.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There was a point in time where the joke was, why do you work in AI when some of us are NI, naturally intelligent, if you want to be kind of snarky about that. But times have changed.
And Motorola supported my PhD work at the company Motorola, and I worked there at their Phoenix plant at what's called a fab. And my job was to use computer vision, again, think cameras and computers, to automatically inspect chips that were manufactured at Motorola. Fast forward 30 years, and the ability to manufacture chips in the United States is a major topic of concern.
So the work that you did for Motorola, by the way, I had a Motorola Razr phone way back in the day before the smartphones of today. Did you work on the Razr phone?
That's exactly what we worked on, and the components for transmission were actually quite expensive for the day and had to be manufactured perfectly for them to operate. In any case, after Motorola, I started my first faculty job at Oklahoma State, and then finally I was fortunate enough to return to my home state of Virginia and join the University of Virginia in 2000.
So, Scott, you're chair of ECE, and we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the research that's going on in the department and your work. But I think I want to talk a little bit more about the work that others are doing in your department. You represent the department. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the projects that are going on beyond your personal group?
I can. And before taking the role of chair, I want to mention that I was at the National Science Foundation for 3 years. I got to see how the so-called sausage was made and learned some tricks of the trade that I could pass on to early investigators.
So what did you do at NSF?
I was a program director in the SIZE Directorate, which is Computer and Information Science and Engineering. And then, due to some shuffling, I became the Deputy Division Director.
So, Scott, as program director at NSF, what were your responsibilities? What did you do?
Well, there's a few responsibilities. One is getting together the nation's experts as panels to judge the proposals that are submitted to NSF. Another is dreaming up new ideas for the NSF. I was fortunate enough to be on a program that came up with a new pandemic prevention program. And I would say third is administering the grants, checking on progress, looking at reports, and doing things that are possibly more mundane.
But you get to see firsthand what the research that's going on in the country. That, I presume, positions you well to be a department chair.
It's amazing. You get to see the cutting-edge research before it's even funded, before it's even embarked upon. And so, yes, that gave me some ways that I could mentor young faculty. And I want to tie that into my young faculty in ECE. 7 ECE faculty received the NSF Career Award, the top award for junior faculty, in just 1.5 years. This number beats Michigan, Purdue, Texas, Berkeley, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, you name it. So let's talk about some specific projects. So, given our electronic revolution we're now experiencing, electronic vehicles, E-bikes, and don't tell anyone that I have an e-bike, but I do. As we move forward, a major challenge is battery life and excessive waste due to battery disposal. We have a researcher in our department. His name is Ben Calhoun. Ben is making electronics and communication devices that harvest power from body heat, from motion.
Oh, parasitic energy.
Exactly. He has a chip that can continuously measure ECG, the electrocardiogram, which tells you about your heart health, and wirelessly transmits the data, all operating without a battery by harvesting body heat. That's 10 years old. His newer chips work at a power level 10,000 times smaller than that of Bluetooth. Bluetooth is the technology that lets your Apple Watch communicate with your iPhone. If you had a car with a similar reduction in power as Ben Calhoun's chips compared to Bluetooth, you would go to the Subaru dealership, you would buy a Crosstrek, you would fill up with gas, and that would be your last tank of gas for life.
Imagine all of the uses for what would otherwise seem like almost free power, getting something for nothing.
So many uses, and even has pants that you can wear, and they even take pictures of the world without a battery. It's amazing stuff. And that's part of our unique UVA Link Lab, which you've heard about, Ken. It's an interdisciplinary lab that combines several branches of engineering to develop the next generation of what we call cyber-physical systems. And as I mentioned earlier, cyber-physical systems are just computing coming in to play with the physical world. So also in that lab is a woman named Amanda Watson. Amanda is a new hire who's building a watch that can measure your glucose levels. Think about the impact on diabetes, for example. Her watch can also measure blood alcohol or the presence of drugs. There's tons of applications that are completely novel, and she fits squarely into UVA's Pan-University Initiative and Grand Challenge on Precision Medicine and Precision Health. So we're looking to great things coming out of Amanda's lab.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Is she working with Boris Kovachev and Mark Breton? They are well known for the research that goes into the Dexcom device for diabetics. So there's two parts. There's the glucose monitor, which actually requires quite a bit of sophisticated mathematics, right? And also then the insulin pump, significant engineering. So yeah, this fits very well with what we're doing at the university.
She is working with these folks at UVA and has also spun off a company that's going to take this to the translation phase. So one more, Ken, if I might. Perhaps the biggest story in UVA ECE is the advance in artificial intelligence. As I mentioned earlier, 69 engineering professors at UVA have received federal funding in artificial intelligence. This is a huge number. And among them is a person named Jundong Lee, who just won the KDD Rising Star Award. So what's KDD? Well, it's a premier AI conference, but it stands for Knowledge Discovery from Data. So Jundong won this award for his work in privacy, fairness, and security in AI. He's developed algorithms that can detect if a large language model uses your data. You know that AI tends to be hungry and harvest massive amounts of data to emulate human creativity. But you can have the right to keep your proofs private and not exploited by large AI companies. And I think Jundong is a researcher that's making that happen. And Ken, those are just 3 examples of research going on in ECE. There's so many others. There's so many research active professors that are making advances day by day in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Scott, that's great. Thank you. We worked together on UVA's Futures Initiative. I think we had an episode about the future recently. This is an initiative that's run out of the provost's office, where a large group of faculty and administrators and students are discussing what we want the university to look like, say, 10 years from now. Along those lines, and considering that your department is so future-oriented already, what is your vision for the future of ECE? Where are we going?
Well, first, the greatest privilege of serving on the Futures Initiative was meeting your brother. And 2 other prominent university presidents who gave some of their views of the future. So let me tell you a few things I learned from these presidents who visited UVA and how that informs my vision, your question. So President Santa Ono of Michigan, from the University of Michigan, told me, if you want to do something special, Make sure it's initially funded for success and that you have a plan to sustain it for a decade. Otherwise, don't bother. President Michael Crow of Arizona State, who's really akin to a prophet of higher education, told us that the public wants to know the value of higher education for them, not just for the elite. And then President Harriet Nebbard of Harvey Mudd over on the West Coast told us that a good engineer is also prolific in the liberal arts. These all inform my vision. My vision of the future includes engineering as a service to other schools and the college in UVA speak. Typically, we think of college programs such as English, mathematics, foreign language, to sometimes be services to programs such as engineering or business. In the future, I see this will be the opposite. Engineering will serve the college in Darden and McIntyre in terms of educating on AI or the next unknown leap in technology. I personally envision AI for all that prepares every UVA undergraduate to be knowledgeable in AI. As a UVA parent, I feel this could almost be a necessity. I also see training the next generation workforce, which goes along with Michael Crow's message of providing wealth and worth to the public. We're already doing this in ECE. Our IFAB, Innovations in Fabrication, which is led by Art Lichtenberger, is training military veterans to be cleanroom technicians that make chips. Last, in line with President Ono, I see UVA taking some risks, and ECE perhaps, investing in major research thrusts like AI and cementing our presence in Northern Virginia.
I echo your vision, and I hope that comes to fruition. I hope that is our future. So time is short. For students interested in pursuing research or courses in your department, what advice can you offer? And for research, how can they get involved?
First of all, we love undergraduate research at UVA Engineering. Dean West and I are strong proponents of getting our undergraduates involved in real groundbreaking research. In my lab, I have 3 undergraduate women that have already published refereed competitive research papers. So my message, research is personal. Apply for a summer research job. I always take 2 to 3 students each summer. NSF, which we've been talking about, sponsors several research experiences for undergraduates. My own son did one in Montana State. It was a lot of fun. And I think the key is making contact with the researchers and showing interest in advance. So my advice would be make personal contact with your potential research mentor or mentors early.
Well, there you have it. If you're interested in pursuing studies in electrical and computer engineering, make contact early. And what I'm sure you can tell from this conversation is that Scott is everywhere. Knock on the door of his office and he'll invite you in for a conversation. I want to end with a funny story, maybe something that's unrelated to your STEM research. Fun tidbit, maybe something from your childhood, maybe a hobby. Tell us something that you'd like to share.
Let me give you a tidbit from early high school. Early in high school, I programmed a computer game called Space Raider, and it became a hit for a new computer called the Commodore 64.
I had one.
So I was actually a star video game developer for a very, very short time. But my passion is mountain biking. I love to unwind on the trails near Charlottesville. And Ken, we have some of the best and most beautiful trails in this area. There's no Bike with Scott t-shirt. Maybe after becoming a famous podcast guest, I can pull that off.
Well, thanks, Scott. So we're excited to have you at UVA. I think it's wonderful that you're charged with the mission of leading your department. You're definitely fulfilling President Ryan's vision for UVA to be great and good in everything that we do. And I'm Ken Ono, STEM advisor to the provost, and the Marvin Rosenblum Professor of Mathematics, and you've been listening to Who's in STEM.
Who's in STEM is a production of WTJU 91.1 FM and the Office of the Provost at the University of Virginia. Who's in STEM is produced by Catherine Kassaboom, Claire Curzon, Benjamin Larson, Mary Garner-McGee, Katie Nichols, and Rhea Verma. Our music is composed and performed by Robert Schneider and John Ferguson of Apples and Stereo. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Listen and subscribe to Who's in STEM on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back soon with another conversation about scientific and technological innovation at the university.